Hi. So it's probably no surprise to anybody at this point, people like Choro Q games. Why? I'm not really sure myself. I mean, they're good in many ways, but it's not a series I care all that deeply about myself. Whoa, hey. It's just my opinion, you know? It's good. They're good games, I just prefer other things. Okay? Opinions.
Games in the Choro Q series are strange. They're decently well made and have a lot of character to them, but can often have some glaring design flaws. Let's start with Road Trip Adventure, which I would call the benchmark Choro Q experience. Road Trip Adventure is the quintessential RPG and the one which most people have actually played. Its big problem, however, is that it can be bogged down with the tedious process of switching out wheels to deal with various environment types, and not just in races but also in the overworld, which means going between garages. And it can get old very fast. I feel like if you'd somehow been able to switch between wheels and parts on the fly, even if only in the overworld sections, this would have fixed this issue. Besides that though, the world is pretty bare bones to begin with. You find super long stretches of road with not a whole lot of purpose or anything of note to offer, with all the interesting stuff happening in the main town areas for the most part. It's the perfect example of bigger isn't always better when talking about video game overworlds. I'm looking at you, Ubisoft. Then there's Choro Q, which almost has the opposite problem, as it had a pretty small but bland setting split into 3 nearly identical towns with a poorly implemented map, which made getting around, finding events and quests to progress, way more tasking and cumbersome than it needed to be. You'd think with a much smaller scale overworld that it would have been much less confusing. I mean, it makes sense, right? If it's all just towns, then all the good stuff will be condensed into these locations and be way easier to find. I mean, it's half true. All the interesting stuff was in the towns, but they failed to put more effort into the basic game mechanics, and as such, it lacked a proper map to help with navigation, and in turn, was somehow more of a pain to figure out than Road Trip Adventure's big-ass world, since the map was literally no help, and they snuck a day and night cycle in, which contributed by bogging this game down as well, by forcing you to enter and exit buildings arbitrarily just to get to the time of day you want. Then we had Gadget Racers, and you know what? I don't have much bad to say about Gadget Racers. It's probably my favourite of the bunch, with a more condensed world that's more purpose driven. It's easier to find the story, and just from talking to people you see in town, you can stumble upon side quests and fun little stories thread throughout the world. The perfect mix of Road Trip and Choro Q, being laid out in a similar fashion to Diddy Kong Racing, with really tight driving, a good variety of tracks which made great use of the jumping, and gadget mechanics. There's really not a whole lot to complain about, honestly. There's also Penny Racers on PS2, but that one kind of stands on its own in the HG series, since that one isn't even a CarPG and is actually just a straight up racing game, so I consider it to be its own thing, but let's give it another quick blurb anyway. Penny Racers had problems with the AI hustling you by randomly speeding up in the final laps, which made it come down more to stats than ability. But in terms of racing, I'm inclined to say it might be the best. It's straightforward and feels like you're in control a lot more than its younger brothers, and has everything contained to menus, which is both a good thing in that everything is easy to find, but bad in that you miss out on that good old Choro Q CarPG story. But it was the first of the HG series, so it's still getting its legs, or wheels, on the PS2, and as such we can forgive it.
You know, while I'm at it, I said in one of these videos that these games require a lot of grinding to get parts, and somebody in the comments told me to get good. And to that person, I just want to say, mate, I can press the go button as hard as I can. I can hit the turns perfectly, but if I don't have a better engine, it's hardly gonna matter in the end.
At face value, these games are all the same, you know? You race, you drive around, you talk to people with humorous translations and script choices, a cavalcade of different overworld styles and RPG elements thrown into the mix for some genuinely interesting and engaging fun. And if this is your first one of these videos you've seen from me, and you're curious to see more of these Choro Q games covered a bit more thoroughly in their own videos, well, it's your lucky day, as I've got a whole playlist of these things for you. As in the past, I happen to have covered them already in their own videos, so you know, if you want to keep this wonderful viewing experience going after we're done here, I recommend clicking the Choro Q playlist on my channel for a good hour or so of Choro Q reviews and goodness, and you can no doubt see me gradually lose weight as the videos go on, so enjoy that. If you wanted, you can click the card in the corner to open it just now for afterwards. Can't hurt, right?
Anyway, enough shameless self-promotion. Subscribe. So where were we?
So what if you took the developers of Road Trip Adventure, E-Game, and then told them, yo, you see these little toy car looking things? Let's make them fight and kill each other.
You get Seek and Destroy is what happens.
Seek and Destroy, otherwise known as Shin Combat Choro Q in the Land of the Nihon, is another game in the series which fails at mentioning that it's even related to any of the other Choro Q games. Like, seriously, whoever's in charge of naming these titles for their Western releases did a terrible job at telegraphing that these games are even part of a series. I mean, one of them is literally just called Choro Q over here, yet the rest all have totally different names. Why couldn't they have just named them properly? It would have made things so much easier.
For me, that is. Would have made things much easier for me. The guy who reviews these games. For them, slutty views.
I think it's safe to consider Seek and Destroy more of a spin-off rather than a direct sequel, although what muddies this already shockingly brown body of water is that Seek and Destroy is a sequel in and of itself to what is a Japanese-only PS1 game, named Combat Choro Q. Again, Seek and Destroy being named Shin Combat Choro Q in Japan. And in case you were curious, the Japanese word Shin essentially means new or next and is often used for Japanese video game sequel titles. At least that's what Google told me.
Anyway, history lessons, right? They're boring. It's reminding me of school. It's putting me to sleep. Although in saying that, my history teacher was actually a pretty cool guy and he did a good job. I think at this point I'm basically just talking crap to fill time. Join me, won't you, in drinking some water. It's important, kids, to stay hydrated.
Before we get right into things, can we take a moment to appreciate the little animation Plate, the company who published these games in the PAL region, added to the beginning? I just thought that since Plate was actually a pretty tiny company purposefully made for the sole reason of importing and releasing budget game titles, it's a nice touch and pretty adorable. Seek and Destroy opens with a movie talking about the setting of the game. Supposedly, the world is called Q-War. It details about the incoming threat known as the Q-Stein Empire, and how there's gonna be a war, and us good guys called the Protons gotta be all tanky and fight them off, and...
Alright, does anybody really care? I mean, is Choro Q really about the story? Not really, at least not for me. If you're somebody who cares about the story, I'm sorry, but I just want to get to the good stuff. I've got a lot of things I want to say about the actual game.
What would an unlikely review be without some good old menu talk, and Seek and Destroy certainly stands out compared to the other Choro Q games. I mean, in general, it's a pretty standard looking menu, but it's interesting to me because of just how different it is. Most Choro Q games, except maybe Penny Racers, all had a very similar looking menu style to the point where I expected it upon booting these games up, whereas this one looks rather Western in comparison to others, complete with military music and a very American looking medal. With two eagles smooching, how cute. The game does maintain some staples of the series. Like usual, we pop in a name.
My name is Yuusha, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi,
Thank you. No, but seriously, it's a very real problem.
So let's get the Choro Q traditions out the way first, namely currency. Once again, we're not allowed to name our muns. Instead, we're stuck with good old G once again, which I'm assuming stands for gold. Doesn't bother me a whole lot, but like most of the other games, we get to pick our starting vehicle. Although in this case, it's kind of tank we'd like to use, and a quick tip for you, these largely don't matter. As far as I'm aware, the only differences with tank bodies is that some have a rotating main gun on top, whereas others have a static one. And like you'd expect, you can find and unlock a whole load of different tank bodies, all which come with their own stats being categorized as H, T, and B. H stands for heavy, and I could not figure out what the T and B stand for, but my guess would be tactical for the T, and Bidya games for the B. Like I said, I have no idea, but it was fun going through the game and seeing all the bodies, since I don't know a whole lot about tanks, so it was interesting to see the many different shapes and sizes tanks come in. So once you've chosen all your bits and bobs, we're ready to go. First mission you get thrown into, you're not told any controls, just like usual with Choro Q games really. So you just have to kind of figure things out, and honestly it isn't too difficult to get a feel for the controls once you've messed around with the buttons for a while, figuring stuff out. Forward and left stick makes you move forward, you can rotate your main gun with the right analog stick, or L1 and R1 if you prefer, and if you press up or down on the right analog stick, it also changes your firing trajectory so you can aim higher or lower, but there's no visual indication as to where things are going to hit. The cannon itself does move, but you can never really see it due to where the game's camera is situated, so it's practically a blind guess with a bit of gut feeling. You fire with circle, and the X and triangle buttons fire your secondary weapons. Compared to the usual racing Choro Q games, Seek and Destroy feels very different, yet strangely familiar at the same time, and I think a lot of that comes from the way it takes itself so seriously within the confines of the story. There's this huge Star Wars style text crawl at the beginning that's the length of a damned novella, detailing how this takes place in a world called Q-War. There's different factions, including the Q-Stein Empire and the Proton Kingdom, amongst others, and there's this huge war going on, and the text starts off halfway off the screen, so you need to wait a minute before you're actually able to read it.
Damn, it's just me or is this game good at keeping you in suspense?
Honestly, like usual, I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to the game's story. Sorry. The reason being, I was so taken by the actual gameplay. Seek and Destroy is genuinely a really good game and left me wanting to come back for more. All I'll say on the story is from what I saw in playing through the game is that they tried really hard with the in-game cutscenes, with creative camera angles, plenty of movement and talking, and I did find myself interested to watch many of them, since they were just really nicely presented. But anyway, to the game. The missions are usually pretty straightforward, but nicely varied at the same time. The first mission you play right out of the gate takes place in your first base called Rivigaders, which, as a name, sounds like something out of that Chacaron Macaron song. And throughout this game, you control a tank who I think works with the Proton Army, the quote-unquote good guys fighting off the Q-Stein Empire, and the first mission being to defend your base from a Q-Stein convoy trying to conquer it. And as I said, you're just sort of thrown in and asked to figure it out, but it's not too difficult, so you track down baddies, give them a piece of your cannon, and if, like me, and your aim is terrible, you'll quickly realise that you can even destroy buildings, which I find to be a nice touch. It's PS2, so it's pretty basic. You hit a building and it crumbles away to a pile of rubble. We aren't exactly dealing with a frostbite engine here, but I appreciate the addition nonetheless. In between missions, you're dropped into this overworld, which one look at, and I'm sure you'll agree, looks a lot like Final Fantasy's scaled down overworld thing you traverse in between locations. You see flags dotted around. Blue ones are the Proton Army flags, which signify a complete mission, and the black flags represent the Q-Stein Empire, which is a mission that's yet to be completed. It's odd though, since your tank has the same performance and weapons available in the overworld as the missions, so if you're faster in missions, you're faster here, which can be pretty funny considering sometimes you can struggle to even get up hills in the overworld. Your tank has such low engine power to begin with. I initially thought this overworld wasn't much besides a means to get to towns and missions. That is until I drove onto a volcano, which blew me up and told me a password to repeat to this mysterious purple guy in the first town, who then gave me a gun.
What?
Yeah, that caught me off guard. Now let's get on to the main missions and how they work, as that's the best part about this game. You start out with a pretty basic cannon, slow firing but flexible enough to shoot up close and far away, with a bit of luck anyway. But as you go through the game and unlock new bases, like other Choro Q games, the shops change to have bigger and better parts, and they get pretty wild with the weapons. I entered a shop and looked to replace the main cannon and saw beam, and I was just like, yes please. Like most typical Choro Q games, you can upgrade and swap out individual parts of your tank to the point where a tank can end up looking really different from its standard model because you've stacked on a bunch of missiles and booster engines and a goddamn Kamehameha gun. And right now, I just gotta make a point and say, there is a combination of 3 weapons in this game which I found to be ridiculously powerful. You equip the beam as your main cannon, the blaze gun, which is a strong flamethrower, as your first sub-weapon, and missiles as your second sub-weapon. The beam and blaze gun are both close range weapons who drain enemies' health super fast. Even bosses stand no chance against this combo, and yes, this game has bosses. Missiles are just there to give you a way to attack from a distance and hit enemies in the air. This leads me on to the fact about Choro Q games that is prevalent throughout all of them.
Upgrades are awesome. That was a terrible dab.
You can upgrade and swap out your main cannon, 2 sub-weapons, a radar, travel gear for dealing with different types of terrain more efficiently, your engine, your gear for how quickly your tank can rotate its main cannon, amongst other pieces, and there's a ton of customization. And what is great about this is that the game is made in a way to where you can play nearly all the missions with whatever gear you want, bar maybe a couple where you require a specific item like night vision goggles or night parts as the game calls them in cutscenes.
But it's great. You can really tackle this game however you want and play to your preferences in terms of weapons, because that's something that's always been an issue in standard Choro Q games.
What I mean is, in an average Choro Q racing game, you always required specific types of items on your vehicles. You needed a better engine to keep up with the competition, you needed specific tyres to deal with the terrain, as well as extra parts to help you float on water or glide in the air or on specific tracks, etc, etc. And what this always required was grinding, to the point where basically the whole game could feel a bit like a Choro Q.
Even when I was writing that joke, I felt like the sigh of,
What this helps show is the kind of fun Choro Q games can be when applied to gameplay styles outside of racing. I feel in the old ones, the grindy required upgrade gameplay method was sort of a necessary evil because you want the competition and difficulty to scale as you play through. If it was always the same, it could get boring very quickly, but you know what can also get boring?
Racing on the same track over and over to arbitrarily increase a number to buy a new engine. What's up?
The only time I ever had to grind in Seek and Destroy is, as I mentioned before, there was one mission which required the use of night vision goggles, as it's a mission set during the dark hours of the night, and they were a little expensive, so I had to grind me some cash. But you know what? Even the grinding for cash in Seek and Destroy can be interesting because there are so many ways to go about doing it. The standard way is to do missions, since the way the game works generally is that you can tackle a lot of missions in whatever order you want. There's only ever 2 or 3 available missions at any one time, but as I said, it gives you the option to do things your own way, and as a result, if you don't have something for one mission, go to another one, make some cash, then come back to tackle the first one with better gear. The other way to get cash, and the much more interesting way in my opinion, is the arena. You find the arena in each of the towns, and there are 2 types, those being the battle arena and the expert arena. The battle arena is as it sounds. You take on an enemy tank and some gun placements which are just there to increase the difficulty a touch. You beat the enemy tank, which is usually kitted out with some crazy weapon or something interesting, and upon beating you get rewarded with some cash, and you can repeat these missions over and over if you so desire. There are multiple of these per arena in towns, but bear in mind that if you complete a mission once then go back to do it again, your prize money does lower quite a bit. Just once though, so for instance, if you beat a battle arena mission and get 1000 G, every attempt on that same mission afterwards would only net you say 400 G, but it won't lower any further than that. I guess it's to encourage you to play other areas of the game.
Sort of says to me that they don't want you to grind. Kinda makes me wonder if I'm playing these games wrong.
The expert arena is the other half, and it's the most interesting way to make money if you ask me. It's little competitive tasks, and there are usually only 2 of them in any given expert arena, but they remind me a lot of the minigames from Mario Party, using the game's core mechanics in different ways, and you need to complete it and win against a second computer controlled opponent. A couple examples would be you and another tank are tasked with destroying a big stack of what looks to be wheels in the fastest time possible, and whoever beats it first wins. And I have one recommendation for this one: just use the beam, instant win. This is how I grinded out a bunch of cash, just equipping the beam and doing this one a bunch of times over. Probably one of the fastest methods of making money. There's also a variant of this one, which is a room with a bunch of stacks, and you have to be the one to destroy as many as possible. And this one is odd in that the second computer controlled opponent has his own camera, so it goes on to some kind of split screen mode so you can see just what he's doing. And I find that really odd. I guess it just helps to further push my comparison to Mario Party, since in those games, during the minigames, each character tends to have their own screen which you can see. Another expert arena game which I thought was awesome but kind of funny at the same time was racing.
Imagine that, a Choro Q racing game. I've only played like 100 of them.
Yup, going back to the roots and throwing a racing minigame in there was pretty funny to me, and honestly looks and feels kind of similar to the actual racing games, but the mechanics of Seek and Destroy are also totally different, so it still feels unique and interesting. And first time I tried it, I didn't have a very fast tank because in the game, your tank starts out very slow and can stay that way for a while until you hit a town with good engines to purchase. I went back later with a better engine and kicked his ass. Great feeling, but also reminds me of how much Choro Q racing games can be about your parts. But goes to show how fun and interesting the ability to play your own way by choosing your own parts and base vehicles can be, even outside of a racing game. The game overall looks pretty blocky, but great in its own way. Tanks show the different items you've equipped, you have the option to choose the paint job of your tanks. Weapons all look different. If I had any complaints about the visuals, it's that sometimes the mission environments can be a bit boring. Often consisting of just an open grassy field with a few hills, but missions with more of a goal outside of defeat the Q-Stein tanks tend to have a more interesting environment, sometimes even taking place in what later becomes towns that your side has acquired. As for the towns, I could take them or leave them. What is handy though is that if you hit select, you can open up a map that is a small basic 3D render and is sadly one of the best maps in the Choro Q series, since it helps you track down all the various places in the town you'd ever need to visit.
You know, it really makes me sad that these days Choro Q games are just a thing of the past. I mean, the most recent game to come out, as far as I can tell, was on the Wii. Maybe another time. But seriously, I would love to see some kind of crazy modern Choro Q game with better graphics, physics and story, but it feels like something that's just never going to happen.
Even back in the day on PS2, these games were considered budget titles, made fairly quickly and scrappy and looked down upon by the publishers as nothing more than a vehicle to get sales for a quick buck, which is sad considering you can definitely feel the love and passion that went into many of these games. They're fun and have personality, and that's what matters the most. You can tell they were made because people wanted to make them, rather than they were made for the sake of business. It's just unfortunate the interest from investors and such wasn't there for this series, but there you have it. Seek and Destroy, a surprisingly great tank-themed spin-off of the mainstream Choro Q RPG series, and now one of my personal favourites.
and you really watched all the way to the end. You either love me, or love Choro Q, or you fell asleep. Hey, I'm not complaining. But if you are awake, consider subscribing and ringing YouTube's bell of mystery. What does it do? I don't know. God knows at this point. You know what I mean? In the meantime, I think I'm gonna go to sleep. So I'll leave these things here. I'll be here sleeping, and you do one of those. Okay, you do you, and I love you, and good night. And I'll see you in the morning. Click a thing. I work hard. No, I don't. I sleep. I should sleep more, but I really don't. Oh boy. I'm gonna have a nice dream about Xena 64. Stop. I'm not doing it. Okay? Just shut up. It's not happening. Maybe it will. I don't know. I don't know. Good night.